Welcome to Brain Snacks, bite-sized learning moments from We Are Human Leaders. In today's Brain Snack, relationship psychologist Rachel Voysey shares with Alexis and Sally her advice on navigating romantic relationships in the workplace, especially in their early stages. She gives us the non-negotiable boundaries for keeping it professional while still allowing your relationship to grow. For more, check out the full conversation, Romance, Cheating and BFFs, Relationships at Work with Rachel Voysey at the link in our show notes. For now, enjoy.
We spend most of our time, our waking hours at work, so it seems quite natural in a lot of ways that we would then connect with people there. Speaking for myself, my longest relationship started with a colleague I was working at a Japanese company in the Netherlands at the time, and we were lucky in the sense that we had that same sort of level that we were starting at, so there wasn't that power dynamic, but we did have to go through the process of, do we talk to HR? How do we go through that? So I'm sure we'll unpack in this conversation sort of what parameters might be helpful, but I'm also going to throw to Lex because you've had an experience with this too.
I have, yeah. So my current long-term partner, who I've been together with over 7 years now, we actually both met working together as well. And an interesting, perhaps, question for you here, Rachel, is we met, you mentioned earlier this idea of power dynamics. So we met in quite an interesting circumstance where I was brought into the company to then effectively manage him in certain capacities, which is an interesting one. And it was, we sort of navigated that best we could at the time, where we were then separating that working relationship before we sort of entered into a romantic relationship. But can you help maybe unpack this a little bit more for us here? Because very often we find that maybe it's not colleagues on perhaps the same level, if it were in an organization that we're entering a relationship with. Do you have any advice for navigating that power dynamic so things don't get perhaps messy on that side of things?
Yeah, and you're right. It often isn't because it's there's so many tiers of
Totally.
not just power dynamics, but I suppose influence and management.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yep.
it's probably when we really think about it, pretty unusual that you're going to get someone exactly on the same kind of path as you. So I think that's again very common and very realistic. But I mean, something you said is that you really sounds like you thought about it, and I think that's the thing, right? I think we can't pretend that relationships when they're at work are just personal, like they do affect the organization. So I think we have to kind of acknowledge that we know it's personal and it's our world, but when it sits within a workplace too, it can't just be personal. So I think just being really intentional and thoughtful about like, how's this going to affect us? How's it going to affect the people around us? Are we acting in our ethics? Because again, HR is not there to like police your personal life. They're just there to protect the organization, right? To make sure that everything's going as well as it can for everybody, that in its best form. That's what HR should be. Not always, but mostly that's kind of the intention. So, like, again, I think if you think about it and you talk about it from that kind of perspective, and it sounds like you did that as a couple, then I think you can navigate it really well. And it can be like actually really positive for performance and outcomes, actually, sometimes too.
Can we delve into that a little bit more deeply, Rachel, in terms of the impact on organizations? And so perhaps for a leader listening now, perhaps they may not have this situation going on right now, but it comes up often. So what would you sort of suggest in terms of understanding what kind of implications it can have for culture, for team dynamics, and that kind of flow-on effect?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the most important thing when you're just trying to understand it as a leader is that it will affect, because it will affect things. The number one thing I say to people is their transparency and honesty around it. Like as long as there's not kind of like secrets and gossip, and if that kind of thing's taking hold around a relationship, that might be something where as a leader you want to have some conversations, not just with the people in the relationship, but just about trying to keep like fairness and kind of all the good things we want to bring into a workplace around trust and those kind of things that help promote the culture around that relationship, right? So I think the last thing, it's pretty obvious when something's turning a little bit icky and people were talking about it secretly, or there's maybe perceived favoritism or any of those things, or little divisions are forming, people get on their side. We know when that's happening, I think, as leaders. So we have to just be, I think, the thing I guess I talk about mostly in mental health is don't avoid the problem, it'll make it bigger. Just go and have a conversation. It's probably the first thing to do.
What is so interesting about what you've said, Rachel, is in my experience, I felt like almost this tension of wearing two different hats. There was me in a newly formed relationship, trying to navigate, a new relationship and what that means for me as a person, what that means for us in a couple. But then there was me in a management capacity in an organization, having to think about, well, at what point, do I put a formal announcement out? Like, it's quite awkward, and because you're also navigating a new relationship, you don't a lot of the time want to put too much pressure on a fresh relationship until you've really had the opportunity to discover for yourselves what that looks like as well. So I really felt this real tension around, well, what does transparency look like? What is the right moment to have the conversations with my team? Those above me, also my team members. So there aren't issues like gossip and sort of, perceived favoritism and those sorts of things you've mentioned. And I honestly, I don't know if I did it very well, but I found it to be one of the biggest challenges of my career so far.
I completely understand it. And I would say you're not alone there. And so many of the people I've worked with, because there isn't any support or conversation about how you do this. Right? And I always say, what's the difference between secrecy and privacy, right? That's a big conversation I have with people all the time, right? I think you're exactly like, and as you said, you're trying to work out a weird thing before you go into all these other people weird thing. Like, that's big.
The hard
crazy,
launch being immediately, yeah.
Totally. I was like, do I hard launch with an email to the team? Like, this is so weird.
And then when we break up another one, you just don't know how it's, And that's where I think too professionalism comes in. Like, if you can keep the boundaries of the relationship fairly separate to work, and of course, you can't, sneak around with, just like people might see you around and out. But generally, I think if you're being professional at work and there's boundaries there, and in the beginning of a relationship when you're taking it slow, they normally are, then I don't think there's any need for it to cross over or any need to think, oh, am I being secretive about this? No, you're just protecting your privacy and that early development of a relationship. And I don't think there's any need to share that kind of thing too early.
Can we just double click on that a little bit further, Rachel? Something you mentioned there, this idea of boundaries. And that was something where, perhaps in different relationships in the past, if my partner had been outside of the organization, if maybe he'd met me for lunch at work or visited my workplace, I wasn't afraid to be affectionate. But obviously then when you're working in a workplace with your partner, I almost felt like I needed to pull further away and look even more detached from that, especially in the early stages. What are some of the sort of behaviors that are a no-go in the workplace when it comes to relationships? Can you help us unpack that? Because I know it's obviously something we want to be conscious of to not make other people uncomfortable as well. So what are some of those boundaries?
I mean, I think probably physical intimacy is one of them, because again, it's just not something we do at work and it can make other people uncomfortable. And I think anything as well that can feel more like obviously you've got an intimate relationship. Intimate relationships are defined by the fact that you know more about each other than other people know about you. But at work, you don't want to feel like there's some kind of collusion where you guys are working on working together and kind of having this pushing other people away from your special relationship. That can feel less like intimacy and more like kind of threatening and some kind of in-group or collusion. So I think just those things around trying to stay really inclusive, not do too much, or preferably very much limiting anything physically affectionate. And then I think everything else should be fine.
We hope you enjoyed this brain snack from We Are Human Leaders with Alexis and Sally. To learn more about this topic, check out the full conversation at the link in our show notes. And to learn more about human leaders, find us at www.wearehumanleaders.com.